I was standing outside my son's house when I heard my daughter-in-law laugh and say, "Your mother has never helped us with anything." Then Anthony answered, "She just sits alone in that big house while the rest of us struggle." I nearly dropped the grocery bag in my hands. Because for the last 6 years, I had been the one paying their mortgage, their medical bills, their credit card debt, even my granddaughter's college tuition. Every month, I quietly kept my family from falling apart, and they never even knew it was me. But 3 days later, one banking mistake changed everything. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, I want you to tell me in the comments. And if you're watching from somewhere in the world tonight, let me know your city and local time. Sometimes it helps to remember we're not as alone as we think. Don't forget to like and subscribe if stories like this speak to your heart. The hardest part about growing old wasn't the aching knees or the silver hair. It was becoming invisible to the people you once gave your whole life to. Most mornings, I woke up before sunrise in the same quiet Ohio house Miguel and I had bought 42 years earlier. The floorboards still creaked near the kitchen. The coffee pot still sputtered the same way it had since 1998. And every single morning out of habit, I still made 2 cups of coffee before remembering my husband had been gone for 7 years. Grief changes shape over time. At first it screams. Then one day, it just sits beside you quietly at breakfast. After Miguel passed, I truly believed my children and I would grow closer. That's what people always say happens in families after tragedy. They tell you loss brings everyone together. That wasn't what happened to mine. At first, Anthony called every other day. "Hey Mom, just checking in." Then it became once a week, then birthdays, then holidays. Then silence, unless he needed something. My daughter Sophia was different, but not better. She still called more often than Anthony did, but most conversations somehow turned into her stress, her problems, her exhaustion, her bills. Never mine. I became the safe place everyone unloaded on, but nobody ever stayed long enough to ask how I was surviving. Some nights, I would sit in my living room with the television on low volume just to hear another human voice in the house. That's a kind of loneliness nobody prepares you for. I still remember the first Thanksgiving after Miguel died. I cooked everything myself because I wanted the family to feel normal again. Turkey stuffing, sweet potatoes, pumpkin pie, the works. Anthony arrived 2 hours late with Jessica. Sophia and Brian spent most of dinner arguing quietly about money. Nobody noticed I never sat down to eat. I spent the whole evening carrying plates to people who barely looked at me. At one point, I heard Jessica whisper in the kitchen, "Honestly, Catherine should think about downsizing. One person doesn't need this much house." I pretended not to hear it. That became my specialty over the years. Pretending things didn't hurt. Pretending I didn't notice how quickly conversations stopped when I entered a room. Pretending I believed them when they said they were just busy. Busy. That word became the polite replacement for abandonment. I still tried, though. God help me, I tried. Every birthday I mailed cards with handwritten notes inside. Not store-bought messages, real notes, memories, encouragement, love. Sometimes weeks passed before anyone texted thank you. Sometimes they never did. Every Christmas, I bought gifts for the grandchildren, even when money became tight for me emotionally, not financially, though nobody knew that. Olivia, my granddaughter, was the only one who still hugged me like she meant it. At 19, she still looked me in the eye when she spoke. Still asked questions. Still remembered details. "Grandma, are you eating enough? Grandma, did you sleep okay?" Tiny questions. But when you've been emotionally ignored long enough, tiny kindnesses feel enormous. The rest of the family treated me more like an obligation than a person. Jessica, especially. She never insulted me directly. That would have at least required honesty. Instead, she mastered little comments, Oh, Catherine probably wouldn't enjoy that restaurant. Catherine gets confused with technology. Let's not bother her with complicated conversations. I wasn't confused. I was being dismissed. There's a difference. One afternoon, I drove 40 minutes to Anthony's house because his son had a school basketball game. Nobody had invited me officially, but I wanted to support him anyway. When I arrived, Jessica looked surprised. "Oh," she said, "you came. Not, 'We're glad you're here.' Not, 'The kids will be happy.' Just surprise." During halftime, I overheard Anthony talking to another father. "Things are tight right now," he admitted. "Mortgage is killing us." I sat there quietly holding hot chocolate in my lap while listening to my son worry about bills I had already secretly paid 3 days earlier. That was the strange thing. I knew more about my children's financial lives than they realized. Because every month I studied their overdue notices like bedtime reading. Anthony and Jessica were drowning in credit card debt. Sophia and Brian were barely staying ahead of medical expenses after Olivia's asthma treatments became more complicated. And every single time they reached the edge of disaster, some mysterious payment appeared. A mortgage installment covered, a hospital balance erased, an electricity bill marked paid. None of them ever knew the money came from me. I made sure of that. Sometimes I wondered if that made me foolish. Maybe Miguel would have told me to stop. Maybe any sane person would have. But they were still my children, and mothers. Mothers are dangerous when it comes to love. We keep giving long after wisdom tells us not to. I remember one evening when Sophia accidentally called me instead of someone else. She didn't realize I had answered. I heard her crying. "I don't know how we're surviving," she whispered. "If one more bill shows up, we're done." Then Brian said something that stayed with me for weeks. "Well, don't expect your mother to help. She only thinks about herself." I stood in my kitchen, frozen phone pressed to my ear. I almost spoke. Almost. But instead, I quietly hung up. That same night, I transferred enough money to cover their medical debt for 3 months. Not because they deserved it, because Olivia did. That became my justification for almost everything. The grandchildren, the family, the memory of Miguel. I told myself I could carry everyone a little longer. But deep down, something inside me had already started breaking. Not because of the money, because nobody saw me anymore. I had become a ghost, keeping the lights on in other people's homes. And the saddest part? If the money disappeared tomorrow, that might be the first time they truly noticed I existed. Miguel used to say that money revealed people faster than hardship ever could. I didn't fully understand what he meant until after he died. When we were younger, we had nothing. Absolutely nothing. Miguel worked construction during the day and drove delivery trucks at night. I cleaned motel rooms and folded clothes at a department store on weekends while raising Anthony and Sophia. There were months when our refrigerator held more hope than food. But Miguel had something most people didn't: patience. While other people spent every extra dollar trying to look successful, Miguel quietly invested. Small amounts at first, $50 here, $100 there. He studied finance books at the kitchen table after midnight while the children slept upstairs. I used to laugh and tell him he needed rest. He'd grin and say, "One day, Kathy, I'm buying us freedom. Not luxury, freedom." That mattered to him. Over time, his investments grew. Slowly, quietly, secretly. Nobody in our family knew how much we actually had. Not even the children. Miguel insisted on that. "Money changes how people love you," he once told me while fixing the porch light. The moment people think you can save them, they stop learning how to save themselves. At the time, I thought he sounded cynical. Now I think he was simply ahead of me. The year before he died, Miguel was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. Stage 4. I still remember the exact moment the doctor said it. The room suddenly felt too small for breathing. I reached for Miguel's hand, but he squeezed mine first, like he was comforting me instead. That was the kind of man he was. Even while dying, he worried more about everyone else. The cancer moved quickly. Within months, our lives became hospitals' medications, exhausted prayers, and quiet terror at 3 a.m. Anthony visited less than I expected. Sophia cried often, but mostly over the phone. Jessica complained privately that the situation was emotionally draining for the grandchildren. I tried not to resent any of them. People are weak around suffering. Not everyone knows how to stay. But Olivia stayed. She was only 12 then, awkward and skinny with braces and giant glasses. She used to sit beside Miguel's bed, reading books out loud, because his pain medication made it hard for him to focus. One afternoon, after she left the room, Miguel whispered, "That girl has your heart." 3 weeks before he passed away, he asked me to bring home a metal lockbox from the bank. I remember sitting beside him in hospice care while rain hit the windows outside. His hands looked so thin by then. He opened the box slowly and showed me documents I had never seen before. Investment accounts, property shares, retirement portfolios, dividend statements. The numbers made my stomach tighten. "Miguel," I whispered, This is a fortune." He smiled weakly. "No," he said softly, "it's security." I started crying immediately, not because of the money, because I suddenly understood what he had spent his entire life trying to do for us. He had built protection around the family long before any of us realized we would need it. Then his expression changed. More serious. "Listen to me carefully, Kathy," he said. "Promise me something." I grabbed his hand. "Anything. If the kids struggle someday, help them if you can. But don't tell them everything." I frowned. "Why not?" "Because dependence looks too much like love in the beginning." That sentence haunted me later. At the time, I didn't want to hear anything complicated. I just wanted my husband to live. But Miguel kept talking. "They need to believe their choices matter," he said. "If people think there's always someone rescuing them, they stop respecting sacrifice." I looked down at the paperwork again. "How much is all this worth enough that you'll never worry?" he answered. Then he squeezed my hand tighter. "But promise me something else too. Don't let loneliness make you buy affection." I wish I could say I listened. But grief makes intelligent people foolish. After Miguel died, the house became unbearably quiet. For months, I wandered through rooms, touching his old jackets, smelling his coffee mug, rereading birthday cards he'd written me years earlier. The loneliness physically hurt. That's when I started helping the children financially. At first, it felt reasonable. Anthony called one evening, stressed about missing a mortgage payment after layoffs hit his company. The next morning, I anonymously covered it. Sophia cried because Olivia's medical treatments were becoming expensive. I quietly handled the hospital balance. I told myself these were temporary emergencies, short-term help. But emergencies have a way of multiplying when nobody knows the source of relief. Over time, my quiet assistance became part of their survival, without them realizing it. And slowly, something dangerous happened. Their gratitude disappeared before it ever existed. Because as far as they knew, nobody was helping them. They believed they were simply surviving through luck. Meanwhile, I became emotionally poorer while remaining financially secure. That's the cruel irony nobody talks about. Money can protect your children's lives while destroying your place inside them. I remember one Christmas, about 4 years after Miguel passed. I bought Olivia a laptop for college prep classes. I told the family I'd found it discounted. Jessica barely thanked me. Later that night, I overheard her say to Anthony, "Your mom acts generous with cheap gifts because she doesn't contribute in real ways." I sat upstairs in my bedroom afterward, staring at Miguel's photograph for almost an hour. "Maybe you were right," I whispered, but even then I couldn't stop. Because every time I thought about pulling away, I remembered Miguel lying in that hospice bed, asking me to protect the family. And maybe I misunderstood his final wish, because somewhere along the way, protecting them turned into enabling them, and enabling them slowly erased me. Still, I continued. Every month, every bill, every silent rescue, until the day one small banking error threatened to expose everything Miguel had spent his life building, and everything I had sacrificed mine protecting. The first bill I secretly paid for Anthony was supposed to be the last. That's what I told myself anyway. But life has a way of turning temporary sacrifices into permanent habits. It started 2 years after Miguel died. Anthony called me late one evening, sounding unusually cheerful, which should have been my first warning sign. People in trouble often smile harder than everyone else. "Hey, Mom," he said. "Just checking in." I was sitting alone at the kitchen table, eating canned soup. "I'm fine," I answered. "How are the kids?" "Oh, they're good. Busy. You know how life is." Then came the pause. That tiny hesitation parents recognize immediately. Anthony had always paused before bad news, even as a child. When he was 8, he paused before admitting he'd broken Miguel's fishing rod. At 16, he paused before confessing he'd crashed the family car. And at 43, he paused before quietly saying, "Things are a little tight right now." I didn't interrupt. He sighed heavily. "The company's cutting staff. My hours got reduced. Jessica's trying to pick up extra work, but..." He laughed weakly. "Honestly, I'm just trying to keep everything together." I asked if they were behind on bills. "No," he answered too quickly, which meant yes. That night after we hung up, I sat in Miguel's old recliner, staring at the ceiling for almost an hour. Then I opened my laptop. Through the family trust Miguel had established years earlier, I could access certain financial alerts connected to emergency protection accounts. Anthony didn't even remember signing the paperwork after Miguel helped him refinance his mortgage years ago. 3 payments overdue, final warning notice. Possible foreclosure review within 60 days. I felt physically sick. The next morning, I wired the money anonymously through one of Miguel's old holding accounts. 2 days later, Anthony called, sounding relieved. "You won't believe this," he said. "Some kind of banking adjustment happened. The mortgage issue disappeared." I closed my eyes. "That's wonderful," I whispered. That should have been enough. But problems never arrive one at a time in families already struggling. 3 months later, Sophia called crying. Not emotional crying, exhausted crying. The kind where a person sounds too tired even for fear anymore. "Olivia's treatments are getting more expensive," she admitted quietly. "Insurance doesn't cover everything." Olivia had suffered severe asthma attacks since childhood. Most months were manageable, but sometimes emergency visits piled up faster than Sophia and Brian could pay them off. I could hear Brian arguing in the background while Sophia spoke. "We're trying," she whispered. "I just don't know how much longer we can do this." After we hung up, I drove to the hospital billing office myself the next morning. The young woman behind the desk smiled politely while reviewing the account. "That's a significant balance," she said carefully. "I know," I answered. "I paid the entire thing. Every cent." Walking back to my car afterward, I remember sitting behind the steering wheel, gripping it so tightly my fingers hurt. Not because I regretted helping, because I suddenly realized how easy it was becoming. One payment, one rescue, one silent fix after another. And every time I helped them, I convinced myself I was preventing disaster. Maybe I was, but I was also preventing consequences. The years passed like that, quietly, secretly, methodically. Every month I reviewed statements over coffee, the way other grandmothers solved crossword puzzles. Anthony and Jessica's credit cards, Sophia and Brian's medical debt, utility notices, late payments, school balances. Sometimes I imagined myself as some invisible maintenance worker crawling beneath the foundation of the family house, tightening bolts, while everyone upstairs complained about the noise. Nobody wondered who kept the building standing. They only noticed when something shook. Jessica became the hardest part of all. She spent money like anxiety burned holes through her pockets. New furniture, luxury skincare, designer handbags she claimed were on sale. Meanwhile, Anthony worked himself into exhaustion trying to maintain appearances they couldn't afford. I once overheard Jessica complaining during a family barbecue. "I'm tired of living paycheck to paycheck," she snapped. "Your mother could help if she wanted to." I stood 10 feet away, holding a bowl of potato salad. She didn't even lower her voice. Anthony looked uncomfortable, but said nothing. That silence hurt more than her words. Later that evening, after everyone left, I sat alone cleaning paper plates from the backyard tables while listening to crickets in the dark. Miguel used to stay outside with me after parties. We'd hold hands and laugh while cleaning together. That night, I cleaned alone, and somehow that made the loneliness sharper. Still, I kept helping them, because every time I tried stopping, something else happened. Brian's work truck needed emergency repairs. Sophia's heating system failed during winter. Anthony's youngest son needed dental surgery insurance barely covered. Each crisis pulled at me like invisible hooks, and I always answered. I told myself I was protecting the grandchildren. That was partly true. But another truth existed underneath it. Helping them gave me purpose. Even if they didn't appreciate me emotionally, at least I could still matter practically. That realization embarrassed me. Nobody wants to admit they're buying relevance, but loneliness makes bargains with dignity. Then one night, everything almost changed. I was balancing monthly transfers when an unfamiliar number appeared on my phone. "Hello, Mrs. Cruz," a man asked. "This is Daniel from First State Bank. We detected unusual repeated transfers connected to the Miller and Cruz accounts." My heart stopped. "I'm not sure what you mean." "There may have been a processing overlap involving linked family payments. We simply need to confirm authorization." I stared at the screen in silence. Processing overlap. Those two words terrified me. For years, I had carefully separated every transaction through layers of accounts Miguel established. Nobody was supposed to connect the payments directly to me. "Mrs. Cruz, yes," I answered carefully. "If another account holder contacts us regarding the overlap, we may need clarification." After the call ended, I sat motionless in the dark. Because for the first time in 6 years, I realized the secret might not stay buried forever. And if my children ever discovered the truth, I honestly didn't know what would hurt more. Their guilt, or the possibility that they still wouldn't care. I should have stayed home that night. Something inside me knew it before I even picked up the birthday gift. But when you love people, you spend years ignoring your instincts just for the chance to feel included. It was my grandson Ethan's 10th birthday party. Jessica had texted me 3 days earlier. "Party starts at 6. No smiley face, no warmth, just information." Still, I spent nearly an hour wrapping Ethan's gift carefully. A new bicycle. Blue with silver handlebars. Miguel used to say children deserved at least one magical birthday memory every year. I drove to Anthony's house just before sunset with the gift box in my back seat and a homemade chocolate cake beside me. The moment I walked in, I realized I was an outsider in my own family. Music played loudly through the house. Children ran through the living room screaming and laughing. Parents stood around drinking wine and talking. Nobody noticed me enter. I stood near the doorway, awkwardly holding the cake, like a delivery woman waiting for instructions. Finally, Olivia spotted me first. "Grandma." She hurried over and hugged me tightly. For a second, my chest loosened. Then Jessica appeared behind her. "Oh, Catherine," she said. "You made it. Made it. Not I'm glad you're here. Not thanks for coming. Just acknowledgement." I smiled anyway. I brought Ethan a little something. Jessica glanced at the large wrapped box. "You didn't have to spend money?" The irony nearly made me laugh out loud. I followed everyone to the backyard, where balloons floated over picnic tables covered with pizza boxes and paper plates. Anthony was near the grill talking to two neighbors from down the street. He looked tired, older than his 43 years. Stress ages people fast. When he saw me, he gave me a quick side hug. "Hey, Mom, that's all I get," I teased gently. He forced a smile. "Sorry, long week." I nodded like I understood. Because I did. I understood more about his life than he realized. The overdue second mortgage notice sitting in my desk drawer proved that. The birthday party moved around me like I was furniture. People greeted each other warmly while speaking to me politely. There's a difference. Politeness keeps distance intact. Warmth invites people closer. I sat quietly near the edge of the patio while everyone else laughed together. Occasionally, someone remembered to include me for 30 seconds before drifting back into their real conversations. At one point, I overheard Jessica talking to another mother. "We're barely surviving right now," she complained. "Everything costs more these days." The woman nodded sympathetically. Jessica continued. "Meanwhile, Anthony's mom lives alone in that giant paid-off house." I froze. The other woman looked uncomfortable. "Well, maybe she likes her independence?" Jessica laughed softly. Must be nice not worrying about anyone else. I stared down at my paper plate so nobody would see the shock on my face. Not worrying about anyone else. 6 years. 6 years of quietly carrying their bills, their emergencies, their disasters. And somehow, I had become selfish in the story they told themselves. I wanted to stand up right there and scream the truth. I wanted to tell her about the mortgage payment due next Tuesday that I had already covered. I wanted to mention the credit card debt quietly disappearing every month. I wanted Anthony to know the reason collectors stopped calling wasn't luck. But instead, I stayed silent. Because once secrets like that leave your mouth, families never return to what they were before. Later that evening, Ethan opened gifts in the living room while everyone gathered around recording videos on their phones. When he reached my bicycle, his eyes widened. No way he jumped up and hugged me instantly. It was the happiest reaction anyone had given me in months, but Jessica's smile faded almost immediately. "That's expensive?" she said carefully. Anthony looked surprised, too. "Mom, you really didn't need to do that." I shrugged lightly. "He's my grandson." Jessica crossed her arms. "We said simple gifts this year." Something cold settled in my stomach. Not because of what she said, because of how she said it. Like generosity from me somehow embarrassed her. A few minutes later, I went inside to put my purse down in the guest bedroom. As I walked past the kitchen, voices stopped me. Jessica, Anthony, and they didn't know I could hear them. "She always does this," Jessica whispered sharply. "Does what? Acts like some hero with gifts while we're drowning financially?" Anthony sighed heavily. She's just trying to help. No! Jessica snapped. If she really wanted to help, she could actually help. I stood frozen in the hallway. Then came the sentence that cut deeper than anything else that night. She's sitting on all that money and contributes nothing meaningful. My hands started shaking. Nothing meaningful. I nearly walked into the kitchen right then, nearly told them everything. The mortgage, the bills, the debt, the years of silent sacrifice. But then Anthony spoke again, quieter this time. Mom's always been emotionally distant. That hurt worse, because I had spent my entire life loving those children with everything inside me. And somehow, after all these years, I had become the villain in a story built on my own sacrifices. I quietly grabbed my purse and walked back outside before they saw me. The rest of the party blurred together after that. I smiled when expected. Clapped during cake, took photos with the grandchildren, pretended my heart wasn't cracking open beneath my ribs. As I prepared to leave, Olivia followed me to the driveway. "Grandma," I turned. "You okay?" The concern in her eyes nearly broke me completely. I forced a smile. "I'm fine, sweetheart." She hesitated. Then she hugged me again. And in that moment, standing beside my car under the porch light, I realized something terrifying. Olivia was becoming the only reason I still felt connected to this family at all. I drove home crying harder than I had in years, not loud sobbing, the quiet kind older women learn to do. The kind where tears slide silently down your face while you grip the steering wheel and wonder when exactly your own children stopped seeing your heart. That night, I sat alone in Miguel's recliner, staring at the latest payment confirmations on my laptop. Anthony's mortgage, Sophia's hospital balance, Brian's overdue credit account, all paid, all invisible, for the first time ever. I hovered my cursor over the cancellation button, and I seriously considered letting them find out what life looked like without me. The first crack in my secret came from a banking error so small, most people would never have noticed it. But desperate people notice everything connected to money. 3 days after Ethan's birthday party, Brian called Sophia at work in a panic. I only know because Sophia called me afterward crying. Not to confide in me, to unload stress onto me. "Brian thinks somebody hacked our account," she said breathlessly. "There's this weird transfer history showing linked payments." I gripped the phone tighter. "What kind of linked payments I don't know," she answered. "Some old trust account keeps appearing in the records." My pulse started hammering. Miguel's trust. For years, the transfers had moved quietly through layered accounts and automated systems Richard Coleman helped establish legally after Miguel died. Everything was designed to protect privacy, but one banking software update had accidentally attached repeated payment references together. A thread. And now Brian had started pulling it. "Maybe it's just an error," I said carefully. "Brian doesn't think so. Of course he didn't." Brian Miller trusted nobody when money was involved. Unlike Sophia, who emotionally collapsed under financial pressure, Brian became obsessive, controlling, suspicious. He treated money problems like personal attacks against his masculinity. And lately, there had been many problems. The following afternoon, my phone buzzed again. Anthony this time. "Hey, Mom," he said casually. Too casually. Immediately, I knew something was wrong. "Hi, sweetheart. You ever hear Dad mention some kind of family trust before he passed?" Every muscle in my body tightened. Miguel had warned me this day might eventually come. Still, I wasn't prepared for how terrifying it felt hearing the question out loud. "Why are you asking?" Anthony hesitated. Jessica was reviewing some account statements. There's this weird name attached to a few resolved payments over the years. I kept my voice calm somehow. Probably just bank processing. Yeah, he answered slowly. Maybe, but he didn't sound convinced. After we hung up, I walked outside onto my back porch and sat down heavily in one of Miguel's old patio chairs. The October air felt cold against my skin. For the first time in years, I seriously considered telling them everything before the truth surfaced accidentally. But another voice inside me whispered something painful. If they discover it on their own, at least their reactions will be honest. That thought stayed with me all week. Then things got worse. Jessica started calling Anthony's relatives, asking strange questions about Miguel's finances before his death. Sophia texted me asking if Miguel ever had hidden investments. Brian apparently spent hours online researching the trust name attached to the transfers. Nobody asked me directly yet, but I could feel suspicion growing around me like smoke. And suddenly, after years of being ignored, everyone seemed interested in my life. Funny how quickly attention appears when money might be involved. Saturday afternoon, Sophia stopped by unexpectedly. That alone shocked me. She rarely visited without warning. I was folding laundry when I heard her knock. "Hi, Mom." She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, nervous energy in her movements. I invited her inside. For a few minutes, we made awkward small talk while I brewed coffee. Then finally she asked, "Mom, did Dad ever leave you more money than we realized?" There it was. Not concern, not curiosity about me. Money. I stirred cream into my coffee slowly. "Why does that matter?" Sophia sighed. "Brian thinks somebody's been anonymously helping us financially." I said nothing. She leaned forward. "Some bills disappeared over the years. Mom, hospital balances, debt. We always thought maybe insurance adjusted things or creditors wrote stuff off." She trailed off. I watched my daughter carefully. There was no gratitude in her face yet. Only confusion and calculation. "I don't know anything about your finances," I answered quietly. Technically true. I knew everything about them, but they knew nothing about me. Sophia nodded slowly, though I could tell she didn't fully believe me. Then she said something that surprised me. "If someone really was helping us?" Her voice softened. "I don't know what we would have done without them." That sentence stayed with me after she left. Not because it made me feel appreciated, because it made me realize they truly had no idea how close to collapse their lives had been multiple times. Anthony, especially. 2 years earlier, I had quietly prevented foreclosure proceedings from beginning on his home. Jessica never knew. The children never knew. Anthony never knew. Meanwhile, they spoke about me like I contributed nothing meaningful. That night, I opened my laptop and reviewed every payment history connected to the family. Thousands upon thousands of dollars, mortgage installments, hospital balances, school tuition, emergency repairs, insurance premiums, credit card debt, a lifetime of invisible motherhood reduced to transaction records no one appreciated. I suddenly felt tired, not physically, soul tired. Then Sunday came. And with it, the moment I realized things were spiraling beyond my control. Anthony showed up at my house unannounced. Jessica came too. The second I opened the door, I knew this wasn't a social visit. Jessica's smile looked rehearsed. Anthony looked tense. "We were nearby," he lied. "Nobody drives 40 minutes nearby by accident. I invited them in anyway." Jessica complimented the house repeatedly, while glancing around like she was mentally pricing furniture. Anthony barely touched his coffee. Finally, Jessica leaned forward. "Catherine, can I ask something personal?" I nodded carefully. "Were you and Miguel wealthier than the kids realized growing up?" There was no warmth in the question, Only hunger. I looked at Anthony. He avoided my eyes, and suddenly, painfully, I understood something. The possibility of money had made me more interesting to them in 1 week than my emotional existence had in years. That realization broke something inside me. Miguel and I were careful savers, I answered cautiously. Jessica smiled tightly. Well, family should help family, right? The hypocrisy hit me so hard, I almost laughed. Family should help family. After 6 years of secretly carrying them financially while being treated like an emotional inconvenience. Anthony finally spoke. We're just trying to understand some things. I stared at my son for several seconds, then quietly asked, would you still be here if there wasn't money involved? Silence. Absolute silence. Jessica shifted uncomfortably. Anthony looked away. And in that moment, I got my answer. After they left, I walked through my quiet house, touching the walls slowly, like I was seeing my life clearly for the first time. Miguel had warned me. Loneliness had made me buy affection. And now the bill for that mistake was finally coming due. After Anthony and Jessica left my house that afternoon, I sat alone at the kitchen table for nearly 2 hours without moving. The silence felt different now. Not peaceful, threatening. For years, my loneliness had at least been predictable. Painful, yes, but familiar. Now, everything felt unstable. The secret Miguel and I had protected for so long was beginning to crack open, and underneath that fear sat an even uglier truth. My children suddenly seemed more interested in me because they suspected money existed, not because they missed me, not because they loved me, because they sensed value. That realization hollowed me out. 3 days later, Sophia called. Mom, she said brightly, we should all have dinner together sometime. I almost dropped the phone. Sophia hadn't suggested family dinner in nearly a year. Before I could answer, she added, Anthony and Jessica are free Saturday. Of course they were. I agreed anyway, because some foolish part of me still hoped I was wrong. Saturday evening arrived cold and rainy. I spent most of the afternoon cooking, even though I knew better. Roast chicken, garlic mashed potatoes, green beans, peach cobbler. Miguel used to tease me for feeding emotional wounds with food. Kathy, he'd laugh, you think butter can fix betrayal. Maybe I did. At 6 o'clock, sharp Anthony and Jessica arrived carrying an expensive-looking bottle of wine. Another surprise. Jessica hugged me at the door. Hugged me. I almost stiffened from shock. You look beautiful tonight, Catherine, she said warmly. Catherine. Not Mom. Not cold politeness. Warmth. Manufactured warmth. Sophia and Brian arrived 10 minutes later with Olivia. My granddaughter immediately came into the kitchen to help me while everyone else settled into the dining room. Olivia lowered her voice. Grandma, are you okay? I looked at her carefully. Why would you ask that? She hesitated. Because everybody's acting weird lately. Smart girl. Too smart. Dinner started pleasantly enough, but underneath every conversation ran tension like electrical wiring behind walls. Anthony complimented the food 3 separate times. Jessica suddenly wanted stories about Miguel. Brian asked questions about the house. Sophia kept bringing up family unity. I watched them all quietly while cutting my chicken into small pieces. It felt less like dinner, and more like an investigation pretending to be love. Then came the moment I'd been dreading. Brian set down his fork. So he said casually, Anthony mentioned there may have been some investments your husband kept private. There it was. Nobody spoke for a second. Rain tapped softly against the windows. I kept my voice calm. Your father invested wisely over the years. Anthony leaned forward. How wisely I stared at him. Not because of the question, because of the expression on his face. Hope, desperation, calculation. And suddenly, I realized something painful. My children weren't evil. They were drowning. And drowning people often stop caring who they step on as long as they reach air. Still, that didn't erase the damage. Jessica smiled carefully. We just worry about you being alone in such a large house. There it was again. The house. Always the house. Miguel and I bought that home when Anthony was 6 and Sophia was 3. Every wall carried memories. Birthday parties, Christmas mornings, Miguel dancing with me barefoot in the kitchen after midnight, and now my children discussed it like future property. I'm fine here, I answered quietly. Brian cleared his throat. But realistically, wouldn't downsizing make more sense? Olivia visibly winced. Even she heard the greed underneath the concern. I put down my fork slowly. Interesting, I said. Nobody worried about my living situation until recently. The room went still. Jessica forced a laugh. That's not fair. No, I asked softly. Anthony sighed heavily. Mom, we're just trying to understand what's going on. With what, the trust? The money? The weird payments? Finally, direct honesty. I leaned back in my chair. What exactly do you think is going on? Nobody answered immediately. Then Sophia spoke carefully. We think somebody's been helping us financially for years. And Anthony rubbed his forehead. And we think maybe Dad set something up. I almost told them right there. Almost. But then Jessica said something that stopped me cold. If there was money available this whole time, she said slowly, don't you think family deserved transparency? Transparency? The word nearly made me laugh. Transparency from the same people who hid their contempt behind smiles for years. I looked directly at her. Do you know what transparency means, Jessica? Her expression tightened. It means honesty. No, I said quietly. It means being seen clearly. Nobody spoke. I continued before I lost courage. For years, none of you saw me clearly at all. Anthony frowned. That's not true. Really? My voice stayed calm, but barely. When was the last time any of you visited without needing something? Silence. When was the last time someone asked if I was lonely? Sophia looked down immediately. When was the last time I mattered before money entered the conversation? Jessica crossed her arms defensively. You're making this emotional. That sentence broke something open inside me. Emotional. As though motherhood itself wasn't built from emotion. As though decades of sacrifice were some inconvenient overreaction. I stood slowly from the table. For 6 years, I said quietly, I have sat alone in this house while all of you treated me like background noise. Anthony looked stunned. Mom. No, let me finish. My hands trembled slightly. You all decided I was selfish long before you ever knew the truth about anything. Brian's expression sharpened. So there is a truth. I looked at him for several seconds, then deliberately changed the subject. Desserts in the kitchen. The conversation never recovered after that. Everyone became careful, guarded. Even Olivia looked anxious. When dinner finally ended, Anthony stayed behind while the others walked outside. Mom, he said quietly, are you angry with us? I stared at my son, the little boy who used to crawl into bed beside me during thunderstorms, the teenager who once cried after his first heartbreak. The man standing in front of me now felt both familiar and painfully distant. I think I answered slowly, I'm finally starting to see things clearly. His face fell slightly. Then he asked the question I knew was coming. Did Dad leave more money than we knew? I looked toward Miguel's old photograph hanging in the hallway. then back at Anthony. And for the first time in years, I didn't rescue him from uncertainty. "I'm tired, Anthony," I whispered. That was all I said. After everyone left, I walked through the empty house, turning off lights one room at a time. The dining table still held half-empty glasses and dessert plates, proof that family had been there. Yet somehow the house felt lonelier than ever. That night, I opened my laptop. I stared at the automatic payments scheduled for the following week. Anthony's mortgage, Sophia's medical installment, Brian's overdue credit balance. My cursor hovered over the authorization screen. Then slowly, for the very first time, I clicked pause. The first person who truly saw me wasn't one of my children. It was my granddaughter. 3 days after I paused the payments, Olivia showed up at my house alone. I was in the backyard, trimming dead roses, when I heard the gate creak open behind me. "Grandma?" I turned, surprised. Olivia stood there, wearing an oversized gray hoodie with her backpack slung over one shoulder. Her curls were damp from light rain, and she looked nervous. "You came by yourself?" She nodded. "I didn't tell Mom." Something about the way she said it made my stomach tighten. I set the gardening shears down slowly. "Is everything okay?" Olivia walked closer and glanced toward the house like she was making sure nobody else was around. "Not really." I invited her inside immediately. A few minutes later, we sat at the kitchen table with mugs of hot chocolate between us. Olivia had loved hot chocolate since she was little. Miguel used to pile whipped cream so high on top that it overflowed down the mug. For a moment, watching her wrap both hands around the cup, I saw the same little girl who used to sit beside Miguel's hospital bed reading aloud. "You look tired," I said gently. She gave a small laugh. "You look worried." Smart girl. Again. Neither of us spoke for a few seconds. Then Olivia finally blurted out, "Everybody's fighting." I stayed quiet. "Mom and Dad are arguing about money constantly. Uncle Anthony's acting weird too. And Grandma?" She looked directly at me. "They keep talking about you." There it was. I forced myself to stay calm. "What are they saying?" Olivia hesitated. "The adults think there's money being hidden somewhere." I almost smiled at how blunt she was. Teenagers don't waste time dressing ugly truths in polite language. "And what do you think?" I asked softly. She stared down into her mug. "I think everybody suddenly cares about family a lot more now that they think money's involved." The honesty hit me so hard I had to look away, because she wasn't wrong. Olivia leaned forward slightly. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course. Have they been unfair to you?" The question nearly broke me, not because of the answer, because she noticed. After years of invisibility, one 19-year-old girl saw what grown adults ignored. I swallowed carefully. Families are complicated. That's not an answer. Miguel used to say Olivia inherited the dangerous Cruz trait, persistence. I smiled faintly despite myself. "No," I admitted quietly. "It's not." Olivia looked around the kitchen slowly. "You're alone here all the time, aren't you?" The tenderness in her voice made my chest ache. "Yes." "Does it hurt?" I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "Sometimes?" Olivia's eyes filled slightly. That was the moment I realized something heartbreaking. This child had shown me more genuine empathy in 10 minutes than my own children had shown me in years. She suddenly stood up and walked toward me, then wrapped her arms around my shoulders. "I'm sorry, Grandma." I closed my eyes immediately. Nobody had hugged me like that in a very long time. Not politely, not out of obligation, like they truly felt my pain. I held her tighter than I meant to. After a few moments, she pulled away and wiped her eyes quickly. Sorry, she laughed awkwardly. I'm emotional lately. You got that from your grandfather? That made her smile. For the first time in weeks, the house felt warm again. We spent the next hour baking cookies together, while Olivia told me stories about college applications classes and arguments happening at home. Apparently, Brian had become obsessed with tracking the mysterious payments. He thinks somebody's hiding millions, Olivia muttered while stirring dough. I nearly choked on a laugh. Millions. He's acting insane about it. Mom keeps telling him to calm down. Then Olivia glanced at me carefully. But Uncle Anthony thinks you know something. I pretended to focus on the cookie tray. Why would he think that? Because Grandpa trusted you with everything. The simplicity of her answer stunned me. Not greed, not suspicion, trust. To Olivia, the connection between Miguel and me still meant love instead of money. I suddenly felt dangerously close to tears again. Later that afternoon, Olivia helped me carry laundry upstairs. As we passed my office, she stopped. What's that? My heart nearly stopped. One of the payment folders sat partially open on the desk. I crossed the room too quickly. Just paperwork, but Olivia had already seen enough. Hospital invoices, mortgage statements, paid confirmations. Her eyes widened slowly. Grandma! I felt cold all over. For several seconds, neither of us moved. Then she whispered, "It was you I didn't answer immediately, because somehow this moment felt different than the others. Not threatening. Sad." I sat down slowly in Miguel's old office chair. Olivia walked closer carefully. You've been helping everybody. I stared down at the paperwork in silence. Finally, quietly, I said I never wanted anyone to know. Olivia looked overwhelmed. How long years? All the bills? I nodded once. Her face changed completely then. Not greed, not excitement, horror. Oh my God. She sat down across from me slowly. They think you've done nothing for the family. I laughed softly, a broken little sound. Yes. Olivia covered her mouth with one hand. For the first time since this entire nightmare started, another person fully understood the cruelty of it. Not just the money, the emotional betrayal. You paid for my hospital treatments too, she asked quietly. I looked at her. When you couldn't breathe, at 12 years old, do you really think I was going to let money decide your care? Tears immediately filled her eyes. Oh, Grandma. I reached across the desk and squeezed her hand gently. I did it because I loved you all, but they treated you terribly. I smiled sadly. Love makes people accept things they shouldn't. Olivia shook her head immediately. No, this isn't love anymore. This is them using you. The directness startled me, because deep down, I knew she was right. She looked around the office again at all the paperwork. Are you going to tell them? I leaned back slowly. I don't know. Olivia became very quiet, then softly asked the question nobody else had. What do you want? I stared at her. Nobody had asked me that in years. Not Anthony, not Sophia, not anyone. What did I want? The answer frightened me, because for the first time, I wasn't sure I wanted to keep saving people who never truly cared whether I survived emotionally. Olivia stood and hugged me again before leaving that evening. At the front door, she paused. They don't deserve you, Grandma. Then she left, and I stood there alone in the doorway long after her car disappeared, because deep inside, something had shifted. The secret no longer belonged only to me. And now, someone else could finally see the truth. Not the money. Me. The morning I collapsed started like every other lonely morning. Quiet, gray, heavy. I woke before sunrise after barely sleeping. My mind kept replaying Olivia's words from the day before. "They don't deserve you, Grandma." I tried convincing myself she was just emotional. Young people see situations too simply sometimes. But deep down, I knew she had spoken a truth I'd spent years avoiding. I moved slowly through the kitchen, making coffee, while rain tapped against the windows. Ohio winters always seemed colder after Miguel died. Maybe grief changes temperature inside a person. I carried my mug into the living room and stared at the paused payment notifications still sitting open on my laptop. Anthony's mortgage remained unpaid. Sophia's hospital installment was overdue. Brian's credit card company had already issued a warning. For 6 years, problems disappeared before they became disasters. Now, for the first time, I was allowing consequences to arrive, and the guilt was eating me alive. I kept hearing Miguel's voice in my head. "Don't let loneliness make you buy affection. Too late." Around noon, my phone rang. Anthony. I almost didn't answer. "Hi, sweetheart." His voice sounded tense immediately. "Mom, did you stop something?" My stomach tightened. "What do you mean the mortgage payment didn't clear?" There it was, the first crack. I kept my voice steady somehow. "I'm not sure what you're talking about." Anthony exhaled sharply. "We're getting notices again. Jessica's freaking out. Not we're scared. Not we need help. Jessica's freaking out." I closed my eyes. "I'm sorry things are stressful." Silence. Then finally, "Mom, if you know something now would be a really good time to tell us." I almost did. God help me, I almost confessed everything right there just to ease his fear. That's what motherhood does. Even after years of neglect, your first instinct is still to protect your children from pain. But before I could answer, another call came through. "Sophia." I told Anthony I'd call him back. The second I answered, Sophia burst into tears. "They're sending collections notices again," she cried. "Brian says something changed with the account system." I sank slowly onto the couch. "I'm sorry. Mom, I'm scared." That sentence shattered me. Not because she loved me, because fear was finally forcing honesty out of her. And I hated myself for realizing it. The calls continued all week. Anthony sounded increasingly stressed. Sophia increasingly desperate. Brian increasingly suspicious. Jessica increasingly angry. Meanwhile, I barely slept. I kept asking myself the same question over and over. Was I protecting my family by helping them all these years, or destroying them slowly? By Friday, I felt physically exhausted. Emotionally, I felt worse. The human body can only carry so much heartbreak before it starts breaking too. That afternoon, Olivia came by unexpectedly again. The second she saw me, her expression changed. "Grandma, you look awful." I tried smiling. "Thank you, sweetheart. No, seriously." She rushed closer. "Have you eaten today?" I opened my mouth to answer and realized I honestly couldn't remember. She immediately went into the kitchen and started making soup like she belonged there. For a moment, watching her move around the house, I imagined what life might have felt like if love had stayed simple in our family. No secrets, no money, no emotional debts, just care. Olivia carried the soup into the living room and sat beside me. "They're losing their minds," she admitted quietly. I stared into the steaming bowl. "I know. Mom and Uncle Anthony had a huge fight yesterday. What about money? The missing payments? Grandma?" She hesitated carefully. "I think they're starting to suspect you." A strange calm settled over me. Maybe because I was too tired to feel fear anymore. And what do you think they'll do if they find out Olivia didn't answer immediately? Finally, softly, she said, I think they'll feel ashamed. I almost laughed. You have more faith in people than I do. She touched my hand gently. I have faith in you. That nearly made me cry. Then suddenly, without warning, a sharp pain shot through my chest. I gasped softly. Grandma? I tried sitting upright, but dizziness slammed into me so hard the room tilted sideways. Olivia immediately grabbed my arm. Oh my God, Grandma, I'm okay, I whispered automatically. The lie barely left my mouth before darkness flooded my vision. The next thing I remember was distant voices, bright lights, movement, someone saying my name repeatedly. When I opened my eyes again, I was in a hospital bed. Machines beeped softly nearby. Olivia sat beside me, gripping my hand with red, swollen eyes. Relief flooded her face instantly. She's awake! A nurse appeared seconds later, asking questions while checking monitors. Apparently, I'd fainted from exhaustion, elevated blood pressure, and severe stress. Stress. What a small word for years of emotional starvation. A few hours later, Anthony and Sophia arrived. Neither came alone. Jessica and Brian followed behind them. The atmosphere in the room felt tense immediately. Anthony hugged me awkwardly. You scared us. Did I? Or did the possibility of losing me scare them because answers might disappear with me? The thought made me feel cruel. Sophia sat near the bed, crying softly. Meanwhile, Jessica immediately asked the nurse practical questions about treatment costs and recovery time. Brian stood near the window, staring at me carefully like he was trying to solve a puzzle. Then came the moment that changed something inside me forever. The doctor left the room after discussing additional tests. Silence settled heavily, and Jessica sighed. We can't keep doing this. The words hit the room like broken glass. Anthony frowned. Jessica. No, seriously, she snapped quietly. We're already drowning financially. We can't take on another responsibility. Responsibility, not mother, not grandmother. Responsibility. Sophia looked uncomfortable, but didn't disagree. Brian rubbed his forehead. Nobody's saying we abandon her. Abandon. Such an ugly word. Yet there it was anyway. I lay there silent, with my eyes closed. Because they thought I was asleep. And for the first time in my life, I heard exactly what my children sounded like when they thought I couldn't hear them. She can't live alone forever, Jessica whispered. Anthony sounded exhausted. I know. We barely survive as it is. Sophia suddenly started crying harder. I can't do this right now. Then Brian said the sentence that finally broke whatever remained inside me. Well, hopefully there's still money somewhere. Money. Even here. Even now. Hospital bed. Weak heart. Fear. And somehow the conversation still circled back to money. A tear slid silently down my face into the pillow. Nobody noticed, except Olivia. She looked at me and instantly understood I had heard everything. The pain in her expression nearly destroyed me. She squeezed my hand tighter beneath the blanket, and in that moment, lying in that hospital bed, listening to my family discuss me like a financial burden, I finally understood something. I had spent years saving people who never truly learned how to love me back. Hospitals change the way you think. When you spend enough hours staring at white ceilings while machines monitor your heartbeat, the noise of everyday life starts falling away. Pride, fear, excuses, pretending. None of it matters much when your body finally forces you to stop running from the truth. After my collapse, the doctors kept me overnight for observation. Olivia stayed beside me almost the entire time, despite Sophia insisting she should go home and rest. I'm staying, Olivia said firmly. Nobody argued with her after that. Around 9 the next morning, after Anthony and Sophia left to deal with work calls and family logistics, Olivia stepped out to grab coffee from the cafeteria. That's when Richard Coleman walked into my hospital room. He looked older than I remembered. Richard had been Miguel's attorney for over 30 years and one of the few people who knew the full truth about our finances. Tall, silver-haired, always carrying himself with quiet professionalism, he had helped Miguel structure everything carefully before his death. When he saw me in the hospital bed, genuine concern crossed his face. "Catherine." I smiled weakly. "Well, this is embarrassing." Richard pulled a chair closer. "No," he said softly. "This is what happens when people carry too much alone." That sentence nearly undid me immediately, because he understood. Not just the financial burden, the emotional one. He placed a leather folder gently on the bed beside me. "I reviewed the account activity after your message." I nodded slowly. The night after my collapse, unable to sleep and emotionally shattered, I had finally emailed him. 3 simple words: I need help. Richard opened the folder carefully. "For the last 6 years," he said quietly, "you've transferred approximately $1,400,000 into various support channels connected to your family." Even hearing the number out loud shocked me. I stared at him silently. $1.4 million, I whispered. He nodded. "Mortgage rescue payments, hospital debt, tuition assistance, insurance recovery, credit consolidation, emergency business losses, years of invisible protection reduced to neat printed spreadsheets." Suddenly, I felt nauseous, not because of the money, because of what it represented. $1.4 million worth of love, and somehow, I still ended up alone. Richard watched my face carefully. "You never realized how much it became." "No," I admitted softly. He leaned back slightly. "Miguel worried this would happen. That caught my attention immediately." "What do you mean?" Richard hesitated. "Before he died, he told me you would eventually sacrifice too much trying to hold the family together emotionally." My chest tightened. He knew me too well. "Yes," Richard said gently. "He did." Silence settled between us for a moment. Then Richard said something that changed everything. "Catherine, do you understand that your children have become financially dependent on support they don't even realize exists?" I looked down at the paperwork again. Yes, and now that support has stopped. I swallowed hard. Yes. Richard folded his hands carefully. "Then what happens next will reveal who they truly are." That sentence stayed inside me like a bell, because deep down I knew he was right. People reveal themselves most clearly when comfort disappears. I stared toward the hospital window. I never wanted money to become a test. Richard's voice softened. "But it already has." A few minutes later, Olivia returned carrying coffee trays. Richard smiled warmly at her. "There's the brave one." Olivia sat beside me protectively. She'd always liked Richard because he spoke to her like an adult, even when she was little. "How's Grandma?" she asked quietly. "Tired," Richard answered honestly. Then he looked at both of us carefully before continuing. "There are decisions that need to be made." Olivia immediately understood the seriousness in his tone. "What kind of decisions?" Richard glanced at me for permission. I nodded slowly. "The family trust structure needs to change," he said. Olivia looked confused. "What does that mean?" I took a shaky breath. "It means I can't keep living the way I've been living." The words felt strange out loud, almost selfish, but also honest, for the first time in years. Richard opened another folder. Miguel created extensive protections for you, Catherine. The assets, property investments, all of it was designed to ensure your safety first. Safety. I almost laughed at the irony. Financially, I was completely safe. Emotionally, I had nearly destroyed myself. Richard continued carefully. But the current structure allows ongoing discretionary family support. If you choose, we can modify that immediately. Olivia looked between us. You mean stop helping them? I closed my eyes briefly. They think I've done nothing for them. The pain in my own voice surprised me. Richard's expression hardened slightly. I reviewed some recent conversations you documented. The hospital room suddenly felt colder. Over the past few months, during lonely nights, I had begun writing things down. Comments, insults, moments, proof that maybe I wasn't imagining the emotional neglect anymore. Richard tapped the folder gently. No one who truly values you would speak about you the way they have. Tears burned behind my eyes immediately, because hearing another person validate the pain made it impossible to minimize anymore. Olivia reached for my hand again. You deserve better, Grandma. I looked at her. Such a simple sentence, yet my entire body reacted like someone had opened a locked door inside me. Deserve better. When was the last time anyone suggested my feelings mattered that much? Richard cleared his throat softly. There's another matter. I straightened slightly. The house. Of course. Always the house, Richard continued. Miguel placed the property into a protected legacy trust years ago. Nobody can force a sale. Nobody can pressure inheritance changes. Legally, the home remains fully under your control. Relief washed through me so suddenly I nearly cried again, because part of me had started fearing what my family might become if desperation worsened. Richard leaned closer. Catherine, listen carefully to me. I met his eyes. You are not obligated to destroy yourself to prove you love people. The room went completely silent. Even Olivia stopped moving. I think part of me had waited years to hear those exact words. Not obligated, not required, not selfish. Just human. A nurse entered briefly to check my blood pressure, then left again. After she disappeared, Richard spoke quietly. I need to ask directly. What do you want to do? The same question Olivia asked. And suddenly, I realized something terrifying. I had spent so many years managing everyone else's survival that I no longer knew how to answer questions about my own happiness. What did I want? Peace, respect, love, an apology. Maybe all of it, or maybe I simply wanted to stop feeling invisible. I looked down at my trembling hands, then finally whispered the truth. I want to know if my children would still care about me if the money disappeared completely. Richard nodded slowly. Then perhaps it's time they learn what life feels like without your protection. I stared out the window as snow began falling softly outside the hospital. For the first time since Miguel died, I stopped thinking about how to save everyone else and started wondering whether I still had time to save myself. The collapse began quietly. Not all disasters arrive with screaming and broken glass. Some begin with unopened envelopes, missed phone calls, a bank notification at 7:13 in the morning. 3 days after I returned home from the hospital, Anthony received the official foreclosure warning. I know because he called me immediately afterward. Mom, he said breathlessly, something's really wrong. I sat in my kitchen holding a cup of tea I hadn't touched. What happened? The mortgage company says we're behind again. Again. As though the years of invisible rescue had never existed. I closed my eyes briefly. What are you going to do? I don't know, he admitted. Jessica's losing it. Right on cue, I heard Jessica yelling faintly in the background. "You told me it was handled." Anthony lowered his voice. "I'll call you later." The line disconnected. I sat there silently for several seconds afterward. For years, problems disappeared before panic had time to grow. Now panic was finally arriving on schedule, and I hated how guilty that made me feel. An hour later, Sophia called crying again, this time harder. "Mom, the hospital reinstated Olivia's balance." I stared out the kitchen window at the snow collecting across the backyard. Apparently, winter had fully arrived overnight. "I thought insurance fixed it," Sophia whispered desperately. Insurance? Luck? Miracles? That's what they had named my sacrifices all these years. Brian grabbed the phone suddenly. "Mrs. Cruz," he said sharply, "did Miguel leave hidden accounts?" There was no greeting, no concern about my health after the hospital, just money. I felt strangely calm hearing it now. "No. You sure?" "Yes." He exhaled harshly. "Somebody's been paying these bills. This doesn't just happen." I said nothing, because he was finally right. Things like this don't just happen. Somebody bleeds quietly to keep families alive. Brian continued. "If somebody's hiding assets while we're drowning, that's not okay." Something inside me hardened at that sentence. Drowning. Interesting word. Because nobody seemed to notice I had been drowning emotionally for years. The call ended badly. Sophia apologized repeatedly while Brian muttered angrily in the background. Afterward, I sat alone in the silence of my kitchen, feeling older than I had the day before. Then the notices started spreading everywhere. Anthony's utilities, Brian's credit accounts, Sophia's medical payment plans. Late fees multiplied like weeds. The family group chat suddenly became active for the first time in months. "Anthony, does anybody know what's going on with these accounts?" "Sophia, I'm freaking out." "Jessica, something was covering expenses before." "Brian, I'm telling you there's hidden money somewhere." I stared at the messages without responding. Then Olivia privately texted me. "Are you okay? Not, do you know anything? Not what's happening, just concern." I typed back slowly. "I'm surviving." A minute later, she replied, "You shouldn't have to survive alone." I nearly cried reading it, because that girl understood something none of the adults did. Money wasn't the deepest wound in this family. Loneliness was. That evening, Anthony showed up at my house unexpectedly. Alone this time. The second I opened the door, I could see the pressure crushing him. Wrinkled clothes, dark circles, jaw tight with stress. For one painful second, all I saw was my little boy again. Not the man who ignored me. Not the adult who failed me. Just my son. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside quietly. He walked into the living room, slowly glancing around like he hadn't truly looked at the house in years. Miguel's old photographs still lined the walls. Family vacations, Christmas mornings, birthday candles. Proof we were once close. Anthony rubbed both hands over his face heavily. "I don't know what's happening anymore." I stayed silent. He looked at me suddenly. "Mom, are you really telling me you know nothing about this?" There it was again. The question beneath every question. I sat down carefully across from him. "What exactly do you think is happening?" Anthony laughed bitterly. "I think somebody's been secretly helping us for years." I waited, and now they stopped. Silence stretched between us. Then Anthony whispered something that broke my heart. I didn't realize how bad things actually were. For the first time, I heard genuine fear in his voice. Not greed. Fear. I almost reached for him. Almost confessed everything. But then he continued. "Jessica thinks Dad left some hidden fortune." Fortune. I stared at him quietly. And what do you think? Anthony hesitated, then finally admitted, I think if somebody cared enough to help us, we probably didn't appreciate it. The words hit me hard, because it was the closest thing to self-awareness I'd heard from him in years. Still, not enough. But closer. Before I could respond, his phone rang. Jessica. The second he answered, her voice exploded loud enough for me to hear from across the room. Did you ask her about the money? Anthony glanced at me awkwardly. Jess? No, don't. Jess me right now. We're about to lose the house. Always the house, never me. Anthony stepped into the kitchen to continue arguing privately, but voices still carried through the hallway. You think she doesn't know something? Jessica snapped. She's my mother, and she's sitting alone in a fully paid house while we're drowning. I closed my eyes slowly. Even now. Even standing inside my home after my hospitalization, that woman still measured my worth through property. Anthony came back a few minutes later, looking exhausted. I should go. I nodded quietly. At the front door, he stopped suddenly, then asked the question I never expected. Mom, if someone really was helping us. His voice cracked slightly. Why wouldn't they tell us? I looked directly into my son's eyes. And for the first time in years, I answered honestly. Maybe they were afraid you'd only love them because of what they provided. Anthony stared at me silently. I think part of him understood something in that moment. Not everything, but enough to feel uncomfortable. After he left, the house became quiet again. I sat in Miguel's recliner, watching snow fall outside, while my phone continued buzzing endlessly with family panic. Late notices, overdue warnings, arguments, fear. And beneath all of it, one terrible realization slowly spread through the family like poison. Their lives had been held together by invisible hands. And those hands were suddenly gone. For the first time in years, they were finally beginning to feel the full weight of their own choices. The truth finally exploded on a Tuesday afternoon. Not slowly, not gently, like a dam breaking after years of pressure. I was sitting in my living room folding laundry when I heard tires screech outside the house, then car doors slamming, voices, angry ones. Before I could even stand up fully, the front door burst open. Anthony, Sophia, Jessica, Brian, all at once. Olivia followed behind them, looking terrified. My heart immediately started pounding. What is going on? Brian held several printed bank statements in his hand, like evidence in a courtroom. We know, he snapped. The room went still. I looked toward Olivia instinctively. Her face crumpled immediately. She hadn't told them. That much I knew instantly. So, how had they found out? Then Anthony answered the question for me. We went to the bank. Jessica stepped forward sharply. And Richard Coleman was there. Of course. Richard had warned me this might happen eventually. Once Brian became obsessive enough, he would start tracing every possible connection. Apparently, today, he succeeded. Brian threw the papers onto my coffee table. There it is, he said bitterly. Years of payments. I stared down at the statements silently. Mortgage transfers, medical balances, credit settlements, tuition payments, all connected now. No more hiding. Sophia's voice shook. It was you. I looked at my daughter slowly. Yes. The room exploded. Oh my God, Sophia whispered, collapsing onto the couch. Anthony just stared at me like he no longer recognized my face. Jessica reacted differently. Anger first. How could you hide this from us? I almost laughed at the insanity of the question. Hide this from us. As though secrecy was the deepest betrayal in this room. Brian stepped closer aggressively. Do you have any idea what we've been going through these past weeks? That sentence finally broke my silence. Yes, I answered quietly. I do. No, you don't. I know exactly what overdue notices feel like, I snapped suddenly. Because I paid yours for years. Silence crashed through the room. Even Brian stopped talking. My voice trembled now, not from fear anymore, but from years of pain finally surfacing. You think these last few weeks were stressful? I looked at Anthony. Try spending 6 years listening to your own children call you selfish, while secretly keeping their lives from collapsing. Anthony's face drained completely of color. Mom? No, I said sharply. You don't get to interrupt now. I stood slowly despite my shaking legs. For years I had swallowed every insult quietly. Not anymore. I paid your mortgage when foreclosure notices started coming. Anthony looked like he might physically collapse. I turned toward Sophia. I paid Olivia's hospital bills when insurance stopped covering treatments. Sophia burst into tears immediately. Then, toward Brian. I cleared your credit debt twice after your business losses. Brian looked stunned. And finally, Jessica. The woman you called useless and selfish every chance you got. My voice cracked. She's the reason your light stayed on. Jessica's mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Good. For once, silence belonged to them. Anthony sank into a chair heavily. All this time? Yes, I whispered. Sophia covered her face completely. Oh my God. Olivia stood near the doorway crying quietly, the only person in the room whose tears didn't make me angry. Then Jessica suddenly spoke again. You should have told us. I turned toward her slowly. That sentence. That unbelievable sentence. Something cold moved through me. So you could do what exactly I asked quietly. Appreciate me. Jessica folded her arms defensively. We're family. No, I said softly. You liked the benefits of family. The room went silent again. I walked toward the fireplace where Miguel's photograph rested. You all decided who I was years ago, I continued. Lonely old woman, burden, emotionally distant mother. Anthony immediately shook his head. That's not true. It is true. I looked directly at him. I heard you. His face fell instantly. The birthday party. He knew exactly what I meant. I heard all of you, I whispered. For years. Sophia started sobbing harder. Brian rubbed both hands over his face, pacing now. This is insane. No, I answered. This is reality. Then Richard Coleman entered the room. Nobody had even noticed his car arrive. He walked inside, calmly carrying another folder beneath his arm. The second Jessica saw him, her expression hardened. You knew, yes, Richard answered evenly. Anthony looked devastated. How long? Richard glanced at me before answering. Since Miguel passed away. Sophia stared at him through tears. You let us believe. Richard interrupted gently. Your mother protected all of you because she loved you. Then his voice sharpened slightly. The real question is why none of you noticed her suffering while she was doing it. Nobody answered, because there was no answer. Richard opened the folder carefully. These are the complete records. He placed them on the coffee table one by one. Anthony's mortgage history, Sophia's medical debt relief, Brian's business recovery payments, credit card settlements, education funds, 6 years of sacrifice laid bare in black ink. Sophia looked physically sick reading the totals. Anthony whispered, This can't be real. It is, Richard said quietly. Then came the moment I never expected. Anthony started crying. Not polite tears. Real ones. The kind grown men fight desperately to hide. I called you selfish, he whispered brokenly. I looked away because suddenly my own tears were falling too. Sophia slid off the couch onto her knees beside me. "Mom, I didn't know." "No," I said softly. "You didn't want to know." That was the truth. The hardest truth. Nobody had looked closely at me because nobody expected value from me emotionally anymore. Only financially. Then Brian said the worst thing possible. So what now? Not how do we fix this? Not how do we make this right? What now? Money again. Always money. Richard answered before I could. Now he said calmly, "Mrs. Cruz decides what happens next." The entire room turned toward me. For the first time in years, they were truly looking at me, not through me, at me. And strangely enough, after wanting that for so long, it no longer felt satisfying. It just felt sad. I looked around the room slowly, at my son, my daughter, their spouses, my granddaughter, my broken family. Then finally spoke the truth I had avoided for years. I spent so long trying to keep all of you financially alive. My voice trembled, that I forgot I was dying emotionally. Nobody moved, nobody spoke. And for the first time since Miguel died, the silence finally belonged to me. After the truth came out, nobody knew how to behave around me anymore. The room that had once been filled with accusations now felt suffocatingly quiet. Anthony sat hunched forward with both hands covering his face. Sophia cried softly into a tissue beside him. Brian paced near the fireplace like an angry animal trapped in a cage. Jessica stood stiffly near the doorway, arms crossed tightly, her expression shifting between embarrassment and resentment. And Olivia? Olivia stayed close to me, almost protectively, like she was afraid somebody else might hurt me again. Richard eventually broke the silence first. "I think everyone should leave Catherine alone for tonight." Nobody argued, not even Brian. For once, the truth had left them speechless. Anthony stood slowly. "Mom?" His voice cracked badly. I don't even know what to say. I looked at him for a long moment, then answered honestly, "Neither do I." Sophia suddenly rushed toward me crying, "I'm sorry. Oh God, Mom, I'm so sorry." She wrapped her arms around me tightly, and for a second I almost melted into it, because she was still my daughter. But then another memory surfaced. Sophia sitting in the hospital room discussing me like an obligation. Sophia ignoring my calls for weeks at a time. Sophia never asking if I was lonely. I gently pulled away. Her face shattered immediately. That hurt me too. But some wounds can't heal the same day they're finally acknowledged. Anthony stepped closer next. "I swear to you, Mom, I didn't know." "I know," I answered quietly. "That doesn't make it better." His eyes filled again instantly. "No, it didn't, because ignorance may explain cruelty. But it doesn't erase it." Then Jessica spoke, and somehow managed to make everything worse. "Well, none of us asked you to do all this secretly." The entire room froze. Even Brian looked shocked she'd said it out loud. I stared at her slowly. "You're right," I whispered. Anthony turned toward his wife immediately. "Jessica." "No," she snapped defensively. "I'm serious. How are we supposed to appreciate something we didn't even know was happening?" Olivia actually gasped softly. I think that was the moment everyone finally understood the difference between guilt and entitlement. Jessica still believed herself to be the victim somehow. Richard's expression hardened. "Mrs. Miller," he said carefully, "your mother-in-law quietly prevented your family from financial collapse for 6 years." Jessica crossed her arms tighter. "And I'm grateful." "No, she wasn't. Grateful people sound humble." Jessica sounded inconvenienced. I suddenly felt exhausted all over again. Not angry anymore. Just tired. Deeply tired. I looked directly at Jessica. You called me selfish while spending money I secretly provided. Her face flushed immediately. You overheard that I overheard many things. The room went painfully quiet again. Brian stepped in, then surprisingly calmer than before. Look, maybe everybody made mistakes. I almost laughed. Mistakes? Such a gentle word for emotional abandonment. Then Brian continued, but cutting the support without warning nearly destroyed us. There it was, the truth beneath his panic. Not concern for me, concern for survival. And suddenly, I realized something important. Not everybody in this room was sorry for hurting me. Some were simply terrified the help might never return. That understanding changed everything. Anthony looked at me desperately. Mom, please, tell me how to fix this. I stared at my son. The answer came easier than I expected. You can't. His face crumpled instantly. I'm not saying people can't change, I continued softly. But you can't erase years of making someone feel invisible. Sophia covered her mouth, crying harder. Jessica looked away. Olivia moved closer beside me on the couch. And for the first time in years, I chose not to comfort everyone else. I let them sit inside the discomfort they created. Eventually, Richard helped guide everyone toward the door. Sophia hugged me again before leaving. Anthony whispered another apology. Brian nodded awkwardly. Jessica barely met my eyes. Only Olivia lingered. You okay? She whispered. I smiled weakly. I don't know yet. She squeezed my hand. You don't have to forgive everybody immediately. That sentence stunned me, because she understood something my generation rarely did. Forgiveness is not the same thing as access. Love is not the same thing as permission to keep hurting you. After everyone left, Richard stayed behind. The house finally became quiet again. He sat across from me in Miguel's old chair while snow fell outside the windows. How do you feel? He asked gently. I thought about the question carefully. Relieved, I admitted. Then after a pause, and heartbroken. Richard nodded slowly. That's normal. I stared at the family photographs lining the walls. So many years, I whispered. Yes. I kept thinking if I gave enough eventually, they'd love me the way they used to. Richard's expression softened sadly. Catherine, love bought through sacrifice is unstable. Eventually, people stop seeing the sacrifice and only notice the benefits. Tears burned my eyes again. Because Miguel had warned me about this years ago. And I still walked straight into it anyway. Richard opened another folder carefully. The updated trust documents are ready whenever you are. I looked down at the papers. The new structure would change everything. No more unrestricted financial rescues. No more invisible support. No more emotional self-destruction disguised as motherhood. You're certain? Richard asked quietly. I took a long breath, then nodded. Yes, for the first time in years. I meant it. The next few days felt strange. Anthony started calling daily. Sophia sent flowers. Text messages flooded my phone constantly, checking in, asking how I felt, offering help. And maybe part of it was genuine guilt. But another part still felt tangled with fear. Fear of losing access. Fear of consequences. Fear of me finally walking away emotionally. Only Olivia felt different. She came over without asking for anything. She brought groceries once because she noticed my refrigerator was half empty. She watched old movies with me. She listened. And listening Real listening might be the rarest form of love left in the world. One evening, while we folded laundry together, Olivia suddenly asked Grandma, "Are you going to keep helping them financially?" I paused, then answered honestly, "No." She looked relieved, not disappointed. Relieved. "Good," she whispered. I looked at her carefully. Why good? Because her answer changed me permanently. Because loving people shouldn't require you to disappear. I stopped folding immediately. The room went silent. And suddenly, I realized the youngest person in this family understood love better than all of us. That night, after Olivia left, I stood alone in front of Miguel's photograph. "I finally understand now," I whispered. "Not everything, not perfectly, but enough. Enough to know that kindness without boundaries becomes self-destruction. Enough to know that being needed is not the same thing as being loved. And enough to know that I deserved more than surviving on crumbs of affection purchased with my own suffering." The day I signed the new will, snow covered the entire city. Everything outside looked clean, quiet, untouched. I remember standing by the front window that morning, watching white flakes drift across Miguel's old rose bushes while coffee cooled, forgotten in my hands. For years, I had built my life around protecting everyone else from consequences. Now, I was finally learning what it meant to protect myself. At 10 o'clock, sharp Richard Coleman arrived, carrying 2 thick folders beneath his arm. Olivia came too. Not because I asked her, because she wanted to be there. That difference mattered more to me now than almost anything. We sat together in the dining room where Miguel and I had once hosted loud family Christmas dinners, filled with laughter before life became complicated. Richard carefully spread documents across the table. "These are the finalized revisions." I stared at the papers for several moments without touching them. A lifetime reduced to signatures. Property, trusts, investments, legacy. Funny how human lives eventually become paperwork. Richard adjusted his glasses. "Would you like me to review everything again?" "Yes," I answered softly, not because I didn't trust him, because I needed to hear it out loud one final time. Richard nodded and opened the first folder. "The Miguel Cruz Educational Foundation will receive 30% of the estate assets." Olivia looked surprised. I smiled faintly. Miguel always believed education changed lives more permanently than money alone ever could. The Scholarship Foundation would help first-generation college students from struggling families, quietly, without recognition, the way Miguel preferred. Richard continued, "The house remains fully under your ownership for the duration of your life. Afterward, it cannot be sold immediately for profit." That part had been important to me. I refused to let the home Miguel built become another financial feeding frenzy. Instead, the house would remain protected for family gatherings and temporary housing needs under strict conditions. No one person could claim it. No one could weaponize it. Then Richard moved to the harder section. As discussed, Anthony Cruz and Sophia Miller remain beneficiaries under revised conditional distribution terms. Olivia shifted slightly in her chair. The conditions were simple. No immediate lump sums, no unrestricted access, no financial control. Instead, support would be structured around responsibility, stability, and demonstrated change over time. Not punishment, protection, because I finally understood something painful. Giving people unlimited rescue money without accountability had not helped them grow. It had helped them avoid growth. Richard glanced at me carefully before continuing. "Jessica Miller and Brian Miller are excluded from all decision-making authority and direct inheritance control." Olivia quietly muttered, "Good." I almost smiled. Not because I hated Jessica or Brian, but because boundaries finally existed. Healthy ones. Necessary ones. The younger version of me would have felt guilty about that. The woman sitting at the table now felt peaceful. Richard slid the final page toward me. All that remains is your signature. My hand trembled slightly as I picked up the pen. Not from uncertainty, from emotion, because this wasn't really about money anymore. It was about finally accepting that love without boundaries becomes self-erasure. Before signing, I looked up at Olivia. You know why I chose you to oversee the foundation someday? She blinked in surprise. Me? I nodded. You're the only person in this family who saw me before the money. Tears instantly filled her eyes. Grandma? I mean that. Her voice cracked softly. I don't want your money. I know, I answered gently. That's exactly why I trust you. Richard quietly looked away to give us privacy. Olivia reached across the table and squeezed my hand tightly. And for the first time in years, I felt something I thought I'd lost permanently inside this family. Safety, not financial safety. Emotional safety. I signed the document slowly. Catherine Cruz. Each letter felt like reclaiming something. When it was finished, Richard carefully closed the folders. It's done. I exhaled shakily. Outside, snow continued falling softly against the windows. Then came the unexpected knock at the front door. Anthony and Sophia, both standing outside together. Neither looked prepared for confrontation anymore. Just tired. Human. I invited them in quietly. The atmosphere immediately felt awkward when they saw Richard and the paperwork on the table. Anthony looked nervous. Are we interrupting? No, I answered honestly. You're not. Sophia noticed my expression first. You changed the will, not a question, a realization. I nodded slowly. Anthony swallowed hard. I guess we deserve that. Those words surprised me. Not defensive, not angry, just honest. Richard stood politely. I'll give you all some privacy. After he left, silence settled heavily over the dining room. Finally, Sophia spoke first. I haven't slept properly in weeks. Neither had I. But I let her continue. I keep replaying everything we said about you. Tears filled her eyes again. I can't believe we treated you that way. Anthony sat down heavily across from me. I think we got so used to surviving crisis after crisis. He rubbed his face tiredly. We stopped seeing each other as people. That sentence landed deep inside me. Because maybe that was true. Not an excuse, but a truth. Pain and financial fear had slowly turned everyone transactional, including me. I had used money to maintain emotional connection. They had unconsciously accepted the comfort without questioning its source. And somewhere along the way, we stopped acting like a family and started acting like a system. Sophia looked toward the folders quietly. Are you cutting us out completely? There it was. The fear underneath everything. I answered honestly. No. Both of them looked shocked. But things are different now. I continued softly. Because I'm different now. Anthony stared at the table. You should be. I looked at my son carefully, and for the first time in a long time, his guilt seemed real, not performative, not strategic, real. I don't expect forgiveness overnight, he whispered. Good, I answered gently, because healing doesn't work that way. Sophia suddenly started crying again. I miss how we used to be. That broke my heart all over again, because I missed it too. Or maybe I missed who we thought we were. Olivia quietly moved closer beside me. not taking sides, just staying near. And somehow that simple act reminded me what healthy love actually looked like. Not control, not guilt, not dependency, presence. Anthony eventually looked around the old dining room slowly. Dad would be disappointed in us. I looked toward Miguel's photograph hanging nearby, then answered truthfully. No. Everyone looked at me surprised. He'd be disappointed we lost our way, I said softly, but he'd still believe we could find our way back. Silence settled again. But this time, it felt different. Not hostile, not broken, just honest. And honesty, I was finally learning, is where healing actually begins. Healing didn't happen all at once. There was no magical family reunion, no dramatic speech that erased years of loneliness overnight. Real healing turned out to be quieter than that. Slower, more uncomfortable, and far more honest. 3 months after the truth came out, spring finally arrived in Ohio. The snow melted gradually from the yard Miguel once spent hours caring for. Tiny green shoots pushed through the wet soil near the porch, stubborn and alive. I understood those flowers better than I ever had before. Some things survive harsh seasons quietly, not because they're untouched by pain, because they refuse to stop growing. Life inside the family changed slowly after that winter. Anthony started visiting every Sunday morning. Not for money, not for advice, just to help. The first time he showed up with a toolbox to repair my leaking kitchen sink, I nearly cried. Not because of the sink, because he noticed something needed fixing without waiting for me to beg. That used to be normal between us once. Before adulthood, before resentment, before emotional distance hardened into habit. We worked quietly together that morning while sunlight spilled through the kitchen windows. At one point, Anthony suddenly stopped tightening a pipe and looked at me. You know what the worst part is? What I really convinced myself you didn't care about us. The sadness in his voice felt genuine. I set down the dish towel slowly. And I convinced myself the only way to keep you close was to keep rescuing you. We stared at each other for a moment, two people finally grieving the same broken relationship from opposite sides. Anthony shook his head. I don't know how we got here. Neither did I. But for the first time, neither of us pretended the damage hadn't happened. That mattered. Sophia changed too, more slowly, more emotionally. Some days she overwhelmed me with guilt-driven kindness, constant texts, flowers, long apologetic phone calls. Other days she withdrew completely ashamed of herself. Healing embarrassed her. I understood that better than she realized. One afternoon, she came over alone while Olivia was at class. We sat on the back porch drinking iced tea while birds moved through the trees overhead. Finally, Sophia whispered, I think I became selfish without noticing. I looked at my daughter carefully. That kind of self-awareness costs people something. It happens slowly, I answered gently. She wiped at her eyes immediately. I keep remembering all the times you tried reaching out, and I ignored you. I stayed quiet. Not to punish her, to let the truth breathe fully between us. Sophia looked down at her hands. You were lonely, weren't you? The question nearly broke me, because after all this time, she finally saw it. Yes, I whispered. She started crying instantly. I'm so sorry, Mom. This time when she hugged me, I hugged her back. Not because everything was fixed, because sometimes forgiveness begins the moment someone truly understands the wound they caused. Brian remained distant for a while. Embarrassment hit him hard after the truth came out. Pride often suffers most when reality exposes dependency. Eventually, though, even he softened. Not dramatically, but honestly. He started managing his finances differently, took extra work, sold unnecessary things, stopped chasing appearances, and interestingly enough, once money stopped arriving invisibly, he and Sophia argued less. Struggle shared honestly brought more peace than fake stability ever had. Jessica was the hardest. Part of her remained defensive for months. I don't think she wanted to see herself as cruel. Most people don't. But slowly, even with her small things, changed. One afternoon, she arrived unexpectedly carrying groceries. Not expensive gifts, not performance. Groceries. I remembered you mentioned liking fresh strawberries, she said awkwardly. Such a tiny gesture. Yet somehow it felt more sincere than all her forced politeness from before. We still weren't close. Maybe we never fully would be. But at least we were honest now. And honestly, honesty feels safer than fake affection. Olivia remained my constant through all of it. Every Friday night became ours. Movies, tea, long conversations. Sometimes silence. She once asked me if I regretted helping the family all those years. I thought about it carefully before answering. No, I finally said. Really, I smiled softly. I regret losing myself while doing it. That seemed to stay with her. By summer, the house felt different too. Lighter somehow. Not because the family became perfect, because I stopped carrying everyone alone. That changed everything. One evening in late July, Anthony suggested a family dinner. Not at a restaurant. Not somewhere flashy. At my house. The old house. Miguel's house. For a second, fear hit me unexpectedly, because the last family dinners here carried so much pain, but this time felt different from the beginning. Anthony arrived early to help cook. Sophia brought homemade dessert. Brian fixed the broken porch light without being asked. Jessica set the table quietly beside me. And Olivia. Olivia stood in the kitchen laughing while flour covered her hands and music played softly from someone's phone. For the first time in years, the house sounded alive again. Not performative, not forced. Real. At one point during dinner, I looked around the table and suddenly realized something strange. Nobody was talking about money. No tension, no manipulation, no invisible transactions floating beneath conversation. Just people, messy, imperfect, trying. Miguel's photograph sat on the nearby shelf overlooking the dining room. The same warm smile, the same gentle eyes. And suddenly, I could almost hear his voice again. Freedom, Kathy. Not luxury, freedom. For years, I misunderstood what he meant. I thought freedom meant financial security. But sitting there at that table surrounded by flawed people, finally learning how to love honestly, I realized true freedom is emotional. Freedom from buying affection, freedom from guilt, freedom from disappearing to keep everyone else comfortable. Anthony suddenly lifted his glass. To Mom, he said quietly. Everyone looked toward me. His eyes filled slightly. You deserved better from us. The room went silent, and for the first time in many years, I believed the apology. Not because words erase pain, because changed behavior finally stood behind them. I looked around the table slowly, at my children, my granddaughter, the home Miguel built, the family that almost lost itself completely. Then I smiled softly through tears, not because everything was perfect, but because for the first time in a very long time, I no longer felt invisible. After everything that happened, I spent a long time thinking about what truly destroys families. It's not always money. Sometimes it's silence. Sometimes it's pride. And sometimes it's the slow habit of taking someone's love for granted until you stop seeing the person behind the sacrifice. For years, I believed loving my family meant saving them from every hardship. I thought if I gave enough money, enough patience, enough forgiveness, eventually they would feel how deeply I cared. But love without boundaries becomes painful for everyone involved. The truth is, helping people is beautiful. Sacrificing for family can be noble. But no one should have to disappear emotionally just to feel needed. I learned that being needed and being loved are not the same thing. One can drain you, the other can heal you. I also learned that people can change, but only when truth finally forces them to face themselves honestly. My children were not evil people. They were flawed people, busy people, broken people, and somewhere along the way, we all stopped communicating with honesty. Healing only began when the pretending stopped. If you take anything from my story, let it be this: never wait until someone is gone to notice their sacrifices. And if you are the person constantly giving, constantly rescuing, constantly holding everyone else together, please remember that your feelings matter too. You deserve care. You deserve respect. And you deserve love that doesn't require you to destroy yourself to earn it. If this story touched your heart, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is in your city right now. I truly love reading your stories and experiences. And if you've ever felt invisible in your own family, or if someone in your life sacrificed quietly for others, share it in the comments. Your words may help someone else feel less alone. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoy emotional family stories like this one. Thank you for spending this time with me.